Welcome, everybody. This is Script Camp's class on writing dark comedy. We actually did a dark comedy class a couple years ago, but it's been quite a while, and this is a really popular genre nowadays, in so much as that it is a genre. Also, in addition to that, it's just a sort of tone or sensibility that you can take into writing almost anything else. Let's get going. So we're part of Skill Camp, which is part of this group of servers that you can see here. We've got many more that we're adding all the time. We've recently added Game Camp, which focuses on game design and meets Wednesdays at 6 p.m. We have Film Camp, which is focused on filmmaking. Script Camp, which is about screenwriting. Word Camp is about novel writing. And we also have Code Camp, which is for coding. We're going to have classes coming up on all of those that you can see here. Those Film Camp and coding classes are starting in December. In addition, we have lots of weekly events like writers groups, meetups, script swaps, readings, boot camps, labs. So you can see all that here, and this isn't even everything, this is just most things. Most of these are available publicly and for everybody, but for our advanced courses and things like these boot camps that go all the way from idea to finished draft over the course of between 6 weeks for TV, 8 weeks for features, and 12 weeks for the novel, you should sign up for membership, which you can do at scriptcamp.net. And membership comes with access to every event, every workshop, every class on every server. Just a little about me. For anyone who doesn't know by now, I'm Connor. I run Script Camp and Word Camp, and teach the bootcamp courses on both. I've been repped since 2017 as a screenwriter, mostly writing in the horror, thriller, and action kind of space, but dark comedy has always been one of my favorites, both in terms of a genre and in terms of just the tone. And for instance, my Nickel semifinalist script back in 2019 was a surrealist dark comedy. So this is something I have a lot of experience with, and it's just one of my favorite things to watch and read. We're starting today with writing dark comedy, so we're going to be looking at refining your logline and premise. And although we're sort of filtering it through this genre lens, like we're doing with a lot of our boot camps lately. You don't have to be writing a dark comedy to be in the class, or to gain an understanding of certain things from it. So I'd recommend, no matter the genre you're writing, definitely stick around or watch our other videos and be in our other events. So we're starting with dark comedy. Refine your logline and premise. So we'll look at some basics of the genre, how it works, topics and subject matter, and how we approach it, and things like this. And then we will have some time to evaluate and look at loglines and premises, ideally of dark comedies, but even if it's something else, then we'll still be glad to evaluate those today. Then over the next 8 weeks, you can see that we're going to spend the first half on plotting and planning. So logline to outline, we're going to finalize that logline and fill out your sketchbook next week by the 24th. Crash course on writing one-sheets on the second week, December 1st. You're going to break your story beats using outlining techniques, and try to write a one-page synopsis for that story. You're going to move ahead to complete your scene cards for the third week, which is going to be an evolution of your story beats from more general to more concrete and specific. And then from there, you should have a complete plan for the entire story. You know what happens on every page, so you'll start writing pages as of week 4 on the 15th. And from there, you're going to be writing probably 20-ish pages a week. That would be 4 or 5 pages per day on just weekdays. And you're going to follow your writing plan and try to execute on the outline you've written as best you can and stick to it. We do have plenty of other topics, which you can see here. I won't go over everything, but the idea is that your first draft will be completed by February 2nd. So including this week 0 and the sort of conclusion of the final week, that gives you essentially 10 weeks. So that's a really good time to be able to write a full feature script. And normally for an assignment, you're going to be looking at 8 to 12 weeks. So 10 is right in the middle. I would try to be able to write a draft, to get to the point where you can write a draft within 10 weeks. Looks like we have some comments on our other social media sites as well. Hi, everybody. Susan says, I've always wanted to write a dark comedy. I like Heather's. Yeah, Heather's is a great one. The Broadway musical is quite good, too. And if you're watching on one of our other sites, we love having you, and we can see your comments, though it usually takes an extra minute or so for us to see them. But you should also join us on Discord, which you can do by going to our website at scriptcamp.net and clicking that link, scriptcamp.net, and clicking the link in the top right to get that access to our Discord website or page, and you can then participate live in these interactive class sessions with us. Okay, and we would love if you guys came back next week to pitch your movie. So if you're working on your idea this week, trying to figure out the basics and just get your ideas into shape, Then for next week, maybe you can refine it enough that you can sort of take us through the story, tell us what the major moments or beats of it would be, and get feedback on sort of the broader picture of the whole thing. So if you're coming back to pitch in the next week's class, let us know in the chat. We'd love to see you work on something and get the basic questions answered today. Work on it all through this week, and then on next Sunday, 11 to 1, you'll have something ready to go. Okay, there's a poll in the chat. Take a look at that when you get a chance. So let's go right into it. We are going into dark comedy today, and this kind of highlights that I don't teach a lot of comedy classes, although I've taught many, many other subjects in terms of writing, and I've written a ton of comedy, but it's just very hard to teach comedy, partially because, I don't know, Mark Twain says if the more you explain a joke, the more it's like dissecting a frog. You dissect the frog, you understand how it works, but you kill the frog in the process. Like, it sort of sucks the joy out of comedy to some extent to break it into these really technical terms and to evaluate it objectively. Like, no one's really laughing when they are outlining, for instance. You're doing hard work, and so it's easy to sort of forget about that joy and that creation and that discovery. And you can see, therefore, that's why it's helpful to be writing with partners, with sketch groups, with a writing team, or something else like this that allows you to throw ideas back and forth and actually just get each other laughing. Because it's very hard to make yourself laugh out loud consistently while you're doing really hard work. Most of the time when you're trying to just get plot beats to connect, you're not necessarily focused on, well, is this as funny as it could be? Or what are the jokes going to be once I actually get to that scene? I've written what happens, but how do I make people laugh once we get there? And then we also, on top of that, have this question of just what is funny? And like you can never really tell someone they're wrong for thinking something is or is not funny in the first place. It's like an instinctive reaction. There's almost no thought behind it. It's like a flinch. It's like a sneeze. Laughing at something is not a calculated decision. And so when teaching a subject like comedies and reviewing people's work, sometimes you'll say, that's not funny. And the student will say, I think it is. And what are you supposed to do? Tell them they're wrong? So that's why it can be tough to like break down specifically also just questions like, what makes something funny in our culture versus what's funny in other cultures or with different backgrounds or perspectives? Because there are different things that are funny to different groups, different age categories, different cultures, in different languages. Funny is just such a hard to nail down concept that teaching it objectively becomes tough, and it becomes easier almost to just say, well, let's work on plotting, and then if you're funny, your story will turn out funny. Susan says she'd love to pitch a movie for next week's class. That'd be great. You should join us on Discord, Susan. If you haven't yet downloaded it, you can download it all for free. There's nothing you have to pay for and sign up to get Discord, or nothing you have to subscribe to get Discord. So teaching comedy's hard, learning comedy's hard. It's sort of a thing that to some extent you have or you don't. You can learn to improve it. You can like focus on the technical elements of making a joke or things like that, but it feels to me like the more you focus on those things, sometimes you lose the forest for the trees and you start overthinking it, and overthinking is also kind of the death of comedy to some extent. So I usually say if you're not naturally funny, like if the story ideas you come up with are not funny, I wouldn't try to force yourself to be. And in fact, dark comedy makes a kind of nice landing pad for a lot of people when they try to write a serious story, but it turns out they just have a funnier sensibility than they thought. So that can be a nice way to kind of catch yourself if you find yourself writing like jokes into scenes, and that just feels natural for you. That feels like that really works for the story you're writing, and it makes your story flow well, and you have comedic situations coming up in whatever other genre you are working on. Then often that makes a nice way to sort of pivot to dark comedy, or to maybe realize that that's what you're good at in the first place. And then you can lean in and amplify that aspect in further drafts. But I would say if you're desperately trying to, the more you because what else do we say, like overthinking is an enemy to comedy, trying too hard is also an enemy to comedy. Like if the second it starts to feel forced, then you're starting to lose the audience. So like if you're not coming up with funny stuff on your own, you have to like rack your brain to possibly make something funny, I would write a different genre. I like the harder you try at this, the harder you have to like crack that nut of what on earth is funny. That to me indicates that you probably should just be writing something else. And then if it ends up humorous, that's great, and you can amplify that in your revision. But for the most part, I would not like bang your head against the wall of how on earth do I be funny. Okay, so with that aside, let's look at our overview for today. We'll start with this concept of dark comedy and the differentiation from our what we would just call straight comedy or straight dark comedy, especially in conjunction or in comparison with what we would look at as genre dark comedies that are often genre movies that have a darkly comedic sensibility versus what we would call comedies that have a dark sensibility. We'll look at favorites, trends, and audience expectations, some practical steps for writing a dark comedy from start to finish, topics and jokes, and sort of where's the limit, where's the line, dark comedy characters and morally ambiguous goals, comedy logic, balancing tone, and then we'll finish with Logline Workshop, where you can share your ideas for your movies, whether they are dark comedy or not. And you can get some feedback. It's okay if it's in the very early stage or you don't have a full logline yet. This is just a time to get questions answered and get a push in the right direction. Okay, let's get started. So, what is a dark comedy? So we know that a comedy is a story. In the classical definition, that means it has a happy ending. It's like comedy, happy ending, tragedy, sad ending. There are the two like Greek drama genres. But obviously we have many more. We have a broader definition of it these days. Comedy doesn't necessarily mean happy ending. It's basically just a story that's designed to make the audience laugh. And laugh all throughout. Because one or two funny scenes in a story will not make something comedy automatically. So a dark comedy is going to be a story that has both elements of perhaps comedy, tragedy, maybe horror, something like this, gloomy or morbid subject matter or satire. It's a style of humor that can be applied in whatever dose you want to whatever genre you want. Essentially, dark comedy is just spinning comedic scenarios out of things that are not normally considered to be comedic. They might be darker or more serious subject matter, like war, or death, or alcoholism, or suicide, or addiction, or oppression, or like trauma, things like this that are usually considered off limits for comedy, or people might struggle to see how that could be portrayed as funny. Those make for great dark comedies. As a genre in and of itself, we're referring to comedy films that focus on that disturbing or taboo subject matter. And dramedy refers to an inclusion of but definite separation between serious and funny scenes or issues. But dark comedy is sort of the breach of that wall and the use of one to highlight and amplify the other. So dramedy absolutely can have scenes that are both serious and also funny. But the tone is just slightly different. Dramedy is definitely intended to make us laugh, but it has less of a sort of viciousness to it. Like, dark comedy has this almost entertaining cruelty to it, where we're kind of invited to laugh at the characters a little bit more, and the joke is on them, and whereas dramedy might just be serious situations that end up having laughs here and there. So, genre dark comedy is going to refer to things like horror comedy, thriller comedy, crime comedy. Action comedy can definitely, in the kind of like James Gunn tone and sensibility, can have this emotional effect too. The comedy has to be hinging upon or amplified by the genre element. I would not use the comedy to undercut the stakes and urgency, or else you might be pushing closer to the sort of parody kind of world. Think of you might even look at, there's all these scenes from Scary Movie that are parodies of scenes from Scream, which ends up just weirdly highlighting those tone discrepancies, because Scream in and of itself was sort of a parody, or it was like a deconstruction, a darkly comedic deconstruction of slashers. And then Scary Movie uses some of those scenes, but plays them for like just flat out parody, so the tone gets kind of confused and weird. And like you'll see a sequence that they're almost line for line, beat for beat, but just the sense of danger is all gone in Scary Movie. The comedy undercuts the stakes deliberately because it's not really trying to scare you. So make sure in dark comedy, for the most part, don't let the fact that we're laughing at it make it feel less serious, or make it feel like it's not really happening, or like the characters don't really care, or they're not really being affected by those things. In Scream, for instance, the comedic premise, which is people using the unwritten rules of scary movies to inspire and inform their murders, goes really well hand in hand with that horror premise, which is there are stalkers trying to get you. So those things are really interwoven and connected. Straight dark comedy is going to be movies or shows that feature morbid or taboo subject matter. And this is going to be stuff like Obvious Child, Better Things. These can be played for laughs, like Jojo Rabbit, or comedy is sort of in contrast to the dramatic or serious things, like in Fleabag. Sometimes we have just both all at once, like in a show like Shameless, where it is a serious drama that is consistently pretty funny as well. So it's not quite the same as these raunchy comedies like Booksmart or Knocked Up, which might include taboo things, but nothing in them is way too disturbing, and the taboo nature of them is not really the point. It's more just like a tool to get laughs at times. It's not something we dive too deeply into. Here are some of my favorites. We mentioned Heathers earlier, which I do love as one of my favorite movies, as well as the Broadway show. Martin McDonagh, Yorgos Lanthimos, Sam Raimi, Shane Black. Love all these writers. Some amazing ones. Jennifer's Body and Ingrid Goes West are some female-centric ones that kind of get overlooked a little bit. Happiness of the Katakuris is a bizarre Takashi Miike movie from 2004. This is in the kind of like in the Japanese model of horror comedy. We get some really bizarre stuff. And Wilfred Hesher, the kind of Australian sensibility goes really well with dark comedy too, I think. Here are some recent specs. These are actually not that recent anymore, so let's actually not look at these for now. But I would at least take the takeaways from these would be that hooky and high concept is still very much alive. It's maybe not as necessary as it used to be, but having a premise that just is funny on its own, like the logline makes you laugh, can be really useful in the comedy world. After receiving a lump of coal in his stocking, a spoiled little rich boy hires an unorthodox hitman to kill Santa Claus. That's just kind of funny on its own, like just that idea. So it's helpful to have a premise that seems comedic. If you just say, like, it's about a guy dealing with the death of his estranged uncle, but it's funny. It just doesn't quite sell itself as much as you need to, breaking into screenwriting nowadays. Like, it has to be apparent on its face what is funny about that, for the most part. If you're in the dramedy space, it doesn't necessarily need to. But if you're trying to write hooky, high concept comedies in the darker genre world, then yeah, having a concept that just sounds funny is important. So let's go through these practical steps. So to begin with, you're going to want to find your premise. There's a million ways to do that. You could be looking at the news lately. There's some things that you might consider to be darkly comedic happening all over the world. It could be through inspiration from other stories. It could be looking through history. You could read the Bible. You could open any other text or read any other story, and it's the same way that you get ideas for anything. Also, looking at real life, like I mentioned, politics, obviously. You don't have to write about politics, but looking at the current day real world and satirizing aspects that you find ridiculous or that you think should change, or things like that. Satire has this kind of undercurrent of, I'm highlighting these aspects of society because these are things that should change. So you might just look around at the world around you and ask, what is ridiculous about the ways that we live? Think of a movie like Don't Look Up, which is essentially about people not caring about global warming, but it's reimagined as this looming threat of an asteroid about to hit Earth, and the wacky ways that all of humanity and the media respond to that concept. So it's sort of transposing one issue on top of another, and using one comedic premise to explore a real life issue. So those can be a great place to start. You could look at your own life, you could look at your own funny, weird family, whatever it is that inspires you. So once you have just the basic idea, then you can branch out into figuring out your subgenre or plot archetype if you think that it's going to fit nicely into one of those. That would be something like a road trip story. There's so many of these that it's like almost impossible to list them all out. But Nacho and I have been talking lately, about plot archetypes and the ways that we quantify these and understand these and the way that we can sort of play with these. There's a million sort of story archetypes that you already know, whether you know it or not. The sort of boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy wins girl back. That's like a story archetype. We have a boy and his dog story archetype. Everything from Old Yeller to Shiloh. We have story archetypes like I mentioned the road trip. So the road trip where two people are in a car together, they have to get from point A to point B, having a bunch of wacky misadventures along the way, and over the course of that situation, resolving their interpersonal issue. That's another archetype. We have the kind of like quest archetype, something that could be seen in things like Lord of the Rings, or even in something like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. Right? We have the object that the almost mythical place that we're trying to get to. We have a bunch of adventures. It's like the road trip story, sort of. The quest is very linked to the road trip type of archetype. So, in any case, you can see that there's a million archetypes out there, and you might just ask, does my story fit into an existing mold? And if so, which one? And to what extent do I want to play into that? Or to what extent do I want to oppose, comment on, subvert, or avoid the tropes of that? For instance, you could write something that's like, it's going to be a zombie movie, but it's going to be about anti-vaxxers, and all the anti-vaxxers are sick with germs and stuff, and they're trying to get into the house. Our character, maybe they're in a family of anti-vaxxers, and they're the only one that got the vaccine, or something like that, right? And you sort of write it as if it's a zombie movie, kind of parodying that form and using some of the same plot beats, but in any case, making it all your own. So that's just an example. You don't have to do that, and if you don't really know enough about plot archetypes to determine which one you fit into, or to pick one, then you don't really have to, but it's just a useful starting point. From determining your premise and your subgenre or archetype from there, you're going to Work out a logline, which is going to be that one single sentence that expresses what is the story about. When inciting incident, an adjective protagonist must conflict before stakes is often how we write these out. That's where we start. You don't have to always use exactly that, but that's just a good starting place. And that logline is going to help guide the construction of both your, well, first of all, it'll help you figure out which characters are important to flesh out, but also a well-written logline, it lends itself towards figuring out your plot beats too, because once you have those basic fill-in-the-blank elements, when inciting incident, oh, that goes around page 12 to 15. An adjective protagonist, oh, that's who I'm setting up in the first 10 pages. Must conflict, that's the middle of the movie from about page 25 to 50. Before stakes, oh, that's like the all is lost moment, where towards the end, about the 75-page mark, that's the worst possible thing that either happens or seems as if it is on the verge of happening. It has become inevitable that that bad thing is going to happen. So that's just a little preview of how you can use your logline to immediately place a couple plot beats on the board and figure out how your entire story is going to shake out. And then from there, you can reverse engineer and connect the dots back and forth from those beats that you figured out in order to complete your story beats. So once you have your logline, cast of characters, story beats, of course, all this time you should be reading and analyzing proscripts with similar structure and tone. You don't have to only read your own genre. You should just be reading 3 proscripts a week, like, no exceptions. That is, like, the bare minimum number I would recommend. Well, okay, bare minimum is 1 a week, but 3 is, like, really what you should be reading. It doesn't take that long, especially if you are reading pilots. Like, a half-hour pilot is 30 pages. You can make time to read 90 pages a week. That's 3 half-hour pilots. I'm sure you can. And so be breaking down how those things are working, taking notes, writing out where are the act breaks, where are the major turning points, what is the midpoint, how does the midpoint raise the stakes, how is the escalation working us up towards the finale, how does the break into 3 showcase the main character making that last choice or change that essentially pushes them to becoming the final version of themselves, or the version of themselves that the story has been guiding themselves towards becoming, and how does that transformation reflect and amplify the central dramatic argument. These are all questions that we can be asking even at these early outlining stages. And from your story beats, you're going to expand those into scene cards, which are going to be a more detailed version of story beats, where we're going to end up with a full paragraph at the minimum for every scene, as well as a title for each scene and the page numbers that scene is going to take place on. This is kind of my own method. Not everyone uses this exact set of tools. Not everybody's writing titles for their scenes. That might seem silly to you. But I recommend if you're new at this, just try these things. You don't have to use the parts that don't work for you, but I think you'll find it's more useful than you might assume. Then once you have your scene cards, which is usually going to be between 10 and 25 pages of Google Doc, then you are pretty much ready to go to pages. You could get feedback on it from someone at that point if you want. But if not, then, or if you feel confident that you're ready to start, we say go to pages, meaning you actually start writing and formatting the script, meaning that that's the point where you'll have to download your screenwriting software if you haven't yet done so. But that's only 4 weeks in to the class, so you don't need to download Final Draft, Writer Duet, Arc Studio, or anything else up until that point. So just Google Docs is really all you need for a majority of this process, or not a majority, the first half of this process. Okay. Any questions on the basics before we proceed? Okay, if there's no questions, let's keep going. So the idea is that you're going to write a movie in 8 weeks. I guess it's more like 9 or even 10 if you include the intro, the preview week, and the follow-up on the final week. But in any case, week 1, logline and story beats. Week 2, 1 sheet. Week 3, scene cards. Week 4 to 8, you write those pages. And again, if you want to be in the rest of these classes beyond these free opening weeks, scriptcamp.net. Sign up for unlimited membership. You'll get access to everything on every channel, on every server. So let's start by just looking at this concept of dark comedy. We are looking at topics and subject matter that are normally considered off limits. And that means it could be on the lighter end, things like politics, I would say, prejudice, things like this that are kind of more in the mainstream. Like you could turn on a late night show and you could see jokes about politics. Like that is considered a taboo to some, but it's also a taboo that is discussed all the time. It's a taboo in certain settings, but in the world of entertainment, it's very much like what people want to read and see stories about. So politics are a great place to start in terms of dark comedy writing. There's a lot of things happening in the world that many consider to be sort of absurd. And so you can exaggerate those absurd things, like in a premise like not better look up. Don't look up, which we just talked about, which we're sort of taking a real issue and exaggerating how people's real attitudes are about that thing in order to create some comedic effect or draw attention to that concept. You could easily do a dark comedy on a topic like war, ideological division, gun rights, religion, sacrilege, excommunication, people questioning their faith, any of these kind of taboo topics that are really relevant for a lot of people all over the world. These are the sort of taboo things that absolutely should be talked about and need to be talked about, and people are looking for ways to experience those questions and see those things played out through stories to figure out better ways to live. It's like stories are for much more than just an hour and a half of goofing off with your friends. Stories matter more than that because they sort of model different versions of reality for people. They're like showing different ways that they could live, or different ways that people live around the world, or even within their same country, but in different lifestyles. It's like a way of feeling out. The storytelling in general, and like especially mass market commercial storytelling, is about showing different ways of living and approaching solving problems that as people explore these issues in their real lives, sometimes they want to see reflections of those things, and they want to think about those things from different angles. So it's a great thing sometimes to have a taboo subject that you explore through entertainment. It's like a safe way to talk about that. We could look at sex, obviously. That comes up in dark comedies and straight comedies all the time. In terms of taboo topics, we would look at something obviously like incest, abortion, infidelity, prostitution, or any of these kind of sexual topics that are a bit out of the mainstream. And out of the mainstream perhaps for good reasons, some of them. Mental health, addiction, illness, things like this are becoming much more discussed nowadays, and that's a good thing because the more that these things become normalized, people could watch entertainment about this and realize, I'm not alone, I'm not a monster, I'm not a freak, whatever it is, right? Like, I'm just a normal person. Like, people in this story, I have to deal with these issues and problems, and I could look at how the characters attempt to solve it and learn from them that that's the wrong way or that's the right way to approach this. Violence is really common in dark comedies. Sometimes violence is played for laughs. In stories like Deadpool, which we talked about yesterday in a different class, we have your main character killing people all the time. Normally, the hero killing people, you would think would be a sad or tragic or scary thing, but in dark comedies, we're sort of allowed to laugh at it. And you can tune that exact emotion slightly differently. You know, Jackie Chan movies are action comedies that have him beating people up, and beating people up's not funny really, but since no one's like dying horrifically, we're sort of it's less dark, and it just feels a little bit more like you're watching an acrobatics show than anything else. If you're watching like a really actually violent dark comedy that's like a Yorgos Lanthimos movie that has like really upsetting scenes in it or something like that, it's a different tone and a very different experience. So you should just understand what is that experience and what topics need to, like, I guess the question of what topics need to be treated more sensitively than others and why is a good question to ask. And obviously this changes over time. This changes based on culture. This changes based on politics. But we should always be inquiring and interrogating these things. You know, what is newer and less explored or established? And when are we punching down as opposed to punching up? Like, when are the jokes at someone or something's expense as opposed to perhaps laughing? It's like the difference between laughing at and laughing with someone. Have you guys ever seen a comedy movie, show, or book or something like this that you felt was over the line or in bad taste?
I don't think it's in bad taste, but my husband does. I find it really funny. It's a British comedy called Keeping Mum.
Keeping Mum. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Basically, it stars the great Maggie Smith, and she's a serial killer. She goes to stay. She's out of prison. So she starts way back when she's younger, and she kills her husband. And she's caught. And she goes to prison, and she comes out, and she goes to act as a housekeeper for her daughter's family. So her daughter doesn't know it's her mum. It's got Rowan Atkinson as well. It's got Patrick Swayze. and basically she kills like people that annoy her. Like there's a dog that's constantly barking, and then one morning the daughter wakes up and hears there's no dog barking, and then we see Maggie Smith's character like burying something in the garden, you know, and there's a line. So when the mother's found out, she's like, "You can't just go around killing people you don't approve just because you don't approve of them." To which she responds, and bear in mind she's a sweet little old lady. You know, that's just what my doctors used to say. It was the one point we could never agree on. And it ends with her like getting away with killing all these people, like the family helper. She makes the family life better.
That's funny. So it's almost like there's like an aspect of wish fulfillment in a character like that, where it's like, what if you could just kill the things that annoy you, or kill the animal or the people or whatever that annoy you? It's like
she's completely like sociopathic. She just doesn't occur to her that it's wrong to do this.
Right.
And my husband hates it. It's one of my favourite films, and he hates it because he's like, yeah, he's like, there's nothing redeemable about her, and I'm like, I just think it's really cute that this really innocent looking woman is like this serial killer. She kills Patrick Swayze's character because he's a creep, and I'm like, yeah, go for it, do it, you know.
Right on.
It's like
that Dexter thing.
It's set in a very real world, like it's set in the British countryside. The husband is a vicar. So there's this whole like church thing going on, and there's police. They can't clean the pond because there's something clogging it, which is obviously a body. So like it's set in our world. It's not like Deadpool or Batman where they can get away with doing these because they're like accepted vigilantes. You know, like she will go back to prison if she's caught again, you know.
Right. Yeah, and I can see how that might be over the line for some people. Getting us to kind of try to root for someone that kills a dog is tough. Because like especially the dog thing is like even worse than people for most audience members.
It is a very annoying dog though.
Okay, I believe you. I remember there's
really sad. That's the one that Paul's like he can't do it because it's an old man, and then he's walking around with his posters going, "Have you seen my dog? Have you seen my dog?" And we know what's happened to it. And it's really sad.
Yeah,
it's like
I could see how that could be too much for some audience members. That sort of like harming children or animals thing for many people crosses the line into unforgivable, and they can no longer invest in the story.
Yeah, and that's his. Whereas I still like the film. Like, yeah, there is a moment where I didn't like her, but I still like the film.
Right. Gosh, on the concept of violence to animals, I remember there's a Korean movie. I think it's a Bong Joon-ho movie, or maybe just produced by him. I can't remember. Somebody looked this up. But Barking Dogs Never Bite essentially is a dark comedy about some people that live in an apartment building, and there's a really annoying dog that like lives nearby, and that is annoying. Like they can't sleep because of it, and they conspire to murder it. The opening text of the movie is "No animals were harmed in the making of this film." It is exceptionally dark. One of the opening scenes is somebody trying to hang a dog from its leash like a noose. And it's faked very convincingly. But, like, I think something about starting with that kind of calibrates your... Like, I think the opening couple scenes are so important, especially in this world of, like, carefully tuned comedic tone. The opening couple scenes sort of tell us what we're allowed to laugh at, or what is, like, the comedic potential or premise of this world. So I think you have to set that tone really carefully with your opening. And if it's the sort of world where it's like the most horrible, messed up things in the universe are going to happen constantly all throughout this, and the characters kind of deserve it, so it's okay to laugh at them, then you would set that up early, like ideally in scene one if you can.
I think with comedies, though, I think what usually puts something over the line for me is if the film's taboo and isn't funny. I think that the greatest sin a comedy can commit is not being funny. Right. And I think that if something's really funny, I think we allow it to get away with more. So the funnier something is, the more it can sort of run that edge.
That's a great point. Yeah, if they laugh, you're kind of off the hook.
Anything.
It's sort of like.
Step over the line a bit.
Oh, sorry, you cut off a bit towards the end there, so I may have started speaking over you. Did you want to finish your sentence?
No, I finished. Thank you.
Okay. But that's the sort of thing, like, it's almost like when you're in a fight, or someone's mad at you, and then you make a joke and they laugh, you're like, you laughed, I'm off the hook. It's sort of the same thing. It's like, no one can laugh when they're having a bad time. It's not really, it's not feasible for an audience to laugh when they're having a bad time. It takes a lot of energy to do that. I learned that from one time attending a taping of a sitcom, and they brought in, like, a hype man, and then through take after take after take, the hype man was like, guys, we really need you to laugh on this next one. Like, I know it's early. I know you gotta, like, really just bring it up from deep within. Come on, we really need this one. And it's, like, so exhausting to make yourself laugh, even for 20 minutes, that if someone's laughing, you gotta understand they're not having a bad time.
I find it interesting. There's this big debate in comedy. Like, I see you've got there, when are we punching down as opposed to punching up? And that's a very interesting, like, topic point, because some schools of thought have this idea that, like, if anything's on the table when it comes to comedy. Think about the producers, the TV show, the film, The Producers, by, oh my God.
Mel Brooks.
Who's it by, Connor? Yeah, thank you, Mel Brooks. I mean, there's a whole song in there called Springtime for Hitler, you know? And it's okay because we're laughing at evil. But then there's the question of, well, how far does that go? And I don't personally like comedy that punches down. Like, to me, there's nothing funny about an able-bodied person taking the mickey out of disabled people because you're just punching down.
Yep.
But disabled comedy, as a disabled person myself, is freaking hilarious, you know? And I love watching disabled comedians who do it, but I also love it when a comedian does a faux pas and, like, owns it, you know? There's a guy that did that, Russell Howard, who accidentally insulted a disabled person without realising she's in a wheelchair, and then insulted, your carer here, now that's my husband. It's like, it's your husband, oh my God, this is when I get cancelled, you know, and took the mickey out of it. It's very humble. But there's always this question about, like, I don't think anything technically is off limits, but it's how it's done and what the purpose behind it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's just there to continue stereotypes or like prolific hate, then that's very different to let's have comedy in this. Like all of Mel Brooks stuff, you know, Blazing Saddles, I love it, but it's pointing out the racism in the world. You know, it's not punching down at them. So
yeah,
okay, I'm just gonna have to jump in.
Go ahead.
I've been trying to give my example for forever. Freddy Got Fingered, movie that went too far in the sort of not funny direction and the punching down direction. Stuff that I can't even talk about without getting your YouTube video demonetized. Like licking broken bones is an example that is probably as far as I can go.
What about the deer roadkill part? I mean, good Lord, that movie has some weird stuff in it.
It has actual animal abuse in it. It has there's a running gag of a little kid getting violently assaulted, and that's supposed to be funny, and it's just not funny because it goes way overboard with this sort of idea of this like Farrelly Brothers humor, like something about Mary, or gross out humor like Me, Myself, and Irene or whatever. It is too much to where it's not funny. I think that's the line for me.
Yeah, there's always the rule of funny trumps everything else. It's like because if it is funny, that means you've done a good job, sort of, or essentially. I actually am in the minority. I know that movie is like a famously hated one. I actually remember liking it as a teenager. I don't think I've seen it since then, but something about just the absolute over the top surreal nature of some of those scenes, I kind of ended up liking when he made a piano with all those sausages on strings or whatever on earth that was supposed to be. Who cares? But yeah, for most people, that movie goes too far. And like that concept of this is just mean-spirited it can definitely detract from our permission to laugh at that thing. All right, so in my estimation, here's some topics that are par for the course, some that are iffy in a good way, maybe, and some that are probably too far. So, par for the course, politics, that's like bread and butter. That's not even dark, really, at this point. That's just pretty standard comedy. You'll hear that on, like, daytime TV, not even late-night TV. Class, yawn, yeah, you can do commentary on class. Obviously, there's a lot of great ways to do that, but it's just not edgy. Heteronormative sex, violence, or crime. These are all, like, things that we've seen in presented in comedic ways hundreds and hundreds of times in everything from Marvel movies to Coen Brothers movies to, you know, those gross out Farley Brothers comedies of the 90s, things like this. Iffy in probably a good way, especially if you have a unique first-hand experience or point of view with those things. Religion. That's something that has been explored in mainstream cinema in a comedic lens, but maybe not to its full potential yet. Especially perhaps stories that are critical of religions apart from mainstream conceptions of U.S. Christianity as well. So if you come from a different religious tradition, I think we'd be really fascinated. The world would be fascinated to see what, like, a sort of a comedy that is critical of Judaism or of Hinduism or of Islam from somebody within that culture. I think we'd all be fascinated to see what that looked like. LGBTQ plus issues, that's not necessarily that edgy or outside the mainstream, but it's helpful, again, if you have that kind of first-hand experience with those topics and issues, so therefore you know sort of what to focus on now, because the discourse around these things changes so quickly that it is probably better coming from that more authentic place. Mental health is very much on the table nowadays, has not been discussed or understood that well in the past, but I think movies, especially comedic stories that center on mental health, I mentioned Wilfred earlier, which is one of my favorites and is essentially entirely about mental health. Race, there's lots of great ways to explore that. We've seen that in movies before, but as again, like with LGBTQ plus issues, the discourse around race changes so much and so fast, especially in the U.S., that it's always worth seeing a fresh perspective on this. Suicide, prejudice, and war, I can see each of these things perhaps being the basis for a comedic story, although you always have to understand that there are lines, and you may not know where the lines are until you try to write it, and then you are going to run into some you may not have initially expected. Probably too far, but maybe not. Sexual assault, pedophilia, recent or ongoing real-world tragedies, like, for instance, I don't know, the war in Ukraine, genocide or terrorism, things that are going on now. You will have to do a lot more work to justify these as comedic topics with really brilliant and incisive writing, and you're walking a very tricky tightrope. It's stuff that society kind of has yet to fully reckon with or understand. I would say don't really do Corona stuff unless you have some fabulously unique take on it. So don't do... Actually, we barely even call it Corona anymore, do we? What do we call it now? We just call it COVID now, don't we? You can tell this slide is from a few years ago. So yeah, I would not really do COVID stuff unless you have some brilliant idea for it. Because even if it is brilliant, a lot of people still don't really want to watch or read that as much. I was kind of surprised even watching Station 11 on HBO and being like, oh, we can just do COVID stories now? And that is not for everyone. That will turn a lot of people off. Okay, what do you guys think? What's par for the course? What are some topics that could be explored and maybe would be a good idea to explore, and what's going too far?
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
No, after you.
We'll do Luke and
I really like those religious sort of satire movies, but there's not enough of them, and you're right that there's not enough of other religions as well. But you had that slide that had "Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul," and that's just a great example. I don't think that's too far.
Let's look at the logline of that one. In the aftermath of a huge scandal, Trinity Childs, the first lady of a prominent Southern Baptist megachurch, attempts to help her pastor husband, Lee Curtis Childs, rebuild their congregation. But in order to make the biggest comeback that commodified religion has ever seen, they must first reconcile their faith and confront personal demons. Shot in mockumentary style, Honk for Jesus takes a satirical look at megachurches and how most secular liberals misperceive their religious community. So you can see the theme is basically completely spelled out. This is not a traditional logline, but more just like an ad, like tagline for the movie, or like copy for the spec, essentially. But you can see they highlight the concept right there: commodified religion.
I just wanted to add to that for Luke's attention, in case he's interested. I think Britain has a lot more jokey things about religion. It seems to be more accepted in the UK. So we had one before that was about a disabled person that went to church and everyone was trying to like heal him. That was an interesting one. I didn't see the whole series though. But one thing me and Paul have started watching is called Everyone Else Burns. And what's actually really interesting about this is that the family are quite likable, even though they're all in this very corruptive cult that's clearly meant to be evangelicals slashed with Mormons slashed with the other ones. But it's like we actually do feel sorry for them, you know, in the second series in particular. So I would say, I would say, try and look this one up. Luke, I think it might be your kind of humor.
Thank you for that. Any ideas about? Let's hear what you guys think is too far. What do you think is par for the course? I think somebody was just speaking. Sorry, go ahead.
What was the name of that movie?
The one that
It's a
Becky
TV
was.
show. Yeah, it's a TV show. It's Everyone Else Burns.
Yeah, it's in the chat there.
There you go, I posted it again.
Okay.
Thanks, Becky.
So, what I was going to say is I think a good comedy has to have a certain level of intelligence to it, and I think it should be about showing issues and allowing people who've gone through it to heal and people who haven't gone through it to understand those who have a bit better. And I think that if you can frame it in that way, nothing is off limits. But I think it has to be this thing where people feel happy rather than hurt by it. I think that's the line you have to try and not cross. I think. Going on back to the paedophilia thing, there was, I think, some jokes alluding to it in Father Ted. So I feel like, and they were just like throwaway jokes. I think with these things, if you can allude to them without showing support, if you or allude to the things and let people know you think it's a bad thing, you could get away with it. If everything else is, as I said, is funny. So that those just some thoughts there.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's always a way to touch on these topics, and in a comedy about priests, it'd be a little unusual for it to never come up at all. So I think it's done in a smart way in that show.
I think as well, like you got, recent or ongoing real world tragedies. I would argue that it's actually more important, and we're going off necessarily a film which can take a while to be made, but more kind of skits for YouTube and that kind of thing. You think about during the war, all of the skits that were done about Hitler, and now all the skits that have done about Putin. I think it's all the more important now when we're in a bad situation like the war in Ukraine to be laughing at it. It's something that Mel Brooks said, is that something that's like, I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember the exact quote, but it's that if you have something scary and you make jokes about it, it takes away their power because it takes away our fear of them. And he was saying that about Hitler.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will also point out in German comedic tradition, the idea is usually that you are culturally supposed to portray Nazis as clownishly as possible, so as to do exactly that, so as to sort of make that seem on its face ridiculous. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if we're doing that now, but I'm talking about some of these people that were making things about Hitler while Hitler was still in power, some of the people in England were doing it, and shortly after his demise, like Charlie Chaplin and the likes, you know, and that was while it was going on and while it was still fresh.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that they weren't taking the mickey. There you go. That's the difference about if you're looking at some sort of current ongoing big event. Notice we take the mickey out of Hitler or out of the Nazis. No one takes the mickey out of, no one makes a film, a comedy of the Jews in the concentration camp and their suffering that's like, where they're expecting to have everyone laugh along with them, you know. It's a common joke is to take the power away from the powerful.
Yeah, I could see you could do a comedy about Putin nowadays. I think you could definitely do that, and probably somebody should do like a movie about how, you know, absurd and ridiculous Putin is. And that would actually come from a good place, I feel, or it easily could come from a good place. But we're not going to make a movie where we're laughing at victims.
I was going to say, I think it also depends on how polarizing an event is, because I think that if you do a war where people generally agree this person's the bad side and this person's the good side, then I think it's easy to write a comedy around it. If it's a war where it's very grey and you find that lots of people will be on one side and lots of people will be on the other side, and it's almost like split 50-50, it's going to be very difficult to write a comedy for something like that, because you're going to immediately alienate like half of your audience, just simply.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then your options are basically satirize both of the sides equally, or at the end of the day we say, well, they're both kind of like we like land on this place of they come together and they come to understand each other's perspective and something like that. You can definitely find a way to do it. Go ahead.
Or you just accept that you're going to be labelled either a leftist or a rightist, depending on what it is you're going to be taking the mickey out of, and you're going to be accused of creating propaganda for that side. And you just, if you know, because that's the thing. There are right-wing comedians who take the mickey out of left-wing politics. There are left-wing comedians who take the mickey out of right-wing politics. And I just know that as a left-wing, I wouldn't go to a right-wing comedian. You know, They have their audience. So that's why I'm saying that I don't think there's anything that's off the table. You just got to accept that you might be more niche and be hated by a lot more people if you're choosing to do topics that are a bit more edgelord.
Right. And on that topic of edginess, so we have this idea that comedy is 180, like it's the opposite of what we think will happen sort of thing. We have to push boundaries and shock people to some extent, because all jokes rely on shock in the sense that stories rely on surprise. But edgy humor, I think, is characterized by jokes that are less funny than they are shocking or offensive. The more offensive a joke is, the funnier it has to be to sort of earn that. And everyone has different lines, but the shock or hurt of a joke shouldn't overshadow the punchline, just like the punchline shouldn't overshadow the hurt sort of thing. You might get surprise laughter out of reflex, but if you go too far in the direction of punching down at the vulnerable, then your joke might just leave a bad taste. Okay, I'm not going to play
Can
this.
I also add one
Go
more
ahead.
thing very quickly?
Mhm.
Sometimes you can save something by going as far as possible, so you can come out the other side. It's like a black hole. You know?
It can work.
Double, and then triple down.
Yeah, that's I have a Family Guy image here. You can see Family Guy definitely relies on that humor style sometimes. And if it works, it works. But if it doesn't, you've just annoyed the audience a lot.
I find that works very well with the British. If I'm in a situation and I tell a joke, or I say something and then someone tries to make it sound like I'm being offensive to them, and I can tell that they're joking about it, then I will double down on it and say, yes, actually, I was trying to be offensive to you. And that usually gets more of a laugh, because they're expecting you to go, oh no, sorry, I'm not trying to do that. So I think sometimes people can respect you doubling down.
It's possible.
Because it's like, no, you're sticking to your
you gotta read the room with that one, though. That can lead you into some dangerous roads if you're not careful. But yeah, that can work.
It's never failed me yet.
Okay. Hopefully it won't.
It is pretty much the standard expectation in Britain. If you go to America and do that, IB, you're probably going to get like smacked in the face or worse. but British humour is very bizarre.
Very true. All right, let's look at dark comedy characters. So, in terms of characters, these are great to it's great to design them to appeal to our worst instincts. They want the same things that we do, but they want to approach it in lazy, illegal, dangerous, or dubious ways that get them into trouble. Dark comedy writing is often just making increasingly terrible things happen to these people and watching them squirm to try to get out of it in hilarious ways. So we like to have the unlikable protagonist. We like the jerk, the loser, the selfish. We like the characters that reflect the worst sides of ourselves and kind of allow us to revel in and embrace those traits. Sometimes they're kind of just nice, normal. Oh, sorry, is my text cut off a little bit? Let me move this up. Oop, there we go. Sometimes they're just nice, normal folks, but their personality in whatever way keeps getting them into trouble and getting them in over their head too quickly. Often oblivious to the danger they're getting into. This would be sort of like your Tucker and Dale, who don't even really realize what's going on until quite a ways into the movie, and by the time they do realize what's going on, they've gotten themselves into so much danger that they can't extricate themselves without a lot more deaths. That's one of my favorite dark comedies. We have protagonists that are dorks or idiots. Slackers and cheaters and rogues who want to get rich quick. People with no flaws are rarely funny, so this is a great time to sort of revel in those flaws and to play them up. And then if your characters are competent, they don't have to be incompetent morons. They definitely can be. But even hyper-competent characters like Archer or Fleabag have kind of a vulnerable side to them, or a key defect, or often some sort of lack of self-awareness to those things, which escalates bad situations into worse ones. What are some of you guys' favorite dark comedy characters?
Have a list. Characters?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Tucker and Dale versus Evil. That's an easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Serial Mom was mentioned earlier. That's a great character.
What's Serial Mom?
It's a John Waters movie about a mom, this wholesome suburban mom that is killing people for the pettiest of reasons, like they don't like her petunias or whatever it is.
Oh, okay, kind of like the English one that we were discussing with Maggie Smith.
I really like Rainn Wilson's character in Super.
Me too.
That's a good one.
Yeah. What's so good about him? Why do you like that character?
He's just kind of wholesome in a very deranged way. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something just weirdly likable about this completely psychopathic character.
Yeah, he has such... what I like about him is that he has such noble intentions that are almost comedically... Yeah, you mentioned wholesome. Almost comedically wholesome. Like, the best moments of his entire life, he flashes back to them are, like, getting married, and the second one is telling some cops, he went in there when a bad guy runs past him after a robbery. Like, that's the best moment of his entire life. So he sort of just, like, wants to deliver justice and, tell crime to shut up. And his interpretation of how to do, like, his only idea of how to do that is so ridiculous that we can't help but laugh. He's like, the only way that I can do that is by becoming a superhero and beating people nearly to death.
With a wrench.
With a wrench.
For cutting in line at the movies and things like that.
Right. So it's so inelegant. He's so non-heroic, but he thinks of himself as so heroic, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, even as we can see, you're just a crazy man. I think that there's something endearing about that. There's something relatable about wanting to do the right thing and not knowing how to do it.
Fargo has a bunch of great characters. I'll let someone else jump in, though.
Sure.
I've gone on too long.
But yeah, Fargo, so many. On the show, there's like dozens of great characters. Anyone else?
Have you seen... Sorry.
That's okay, so we'll start with Negan.
Okay, have you seen Drop Dead Gorgeous?
Me? No, I haven't. What's that?
Okay, it's a beauty pageant in sort of Midwest America, where a teenage beauty pageant where the contestants are being killed off one by one in ridiculously funny and horrible, brutal fashions. And Kirstie Alley, I mean, the entire cast was great. The whole cast was amazing. Ellen Barkin, everybody was fantastic. But Kirstie Alley was just so on point, so funny in this film. And if you've never seen it, you should, because it's gold. It's so good.
Sounds good. Is it like a
and then of course
slasher?
there's some of the classics, like Ash is a great character in Evil Dead,
Mhm.
and the priest from Brain Dead. I kick ass for the Lord. That's some great shit too.
Yeah, love
So
that.
yeah, that's it for me.
Sure.
But if you haven't seen Drop Dead Gorgeous, do watch it. It is worth the hour and a half it takes. It's great. It's a mockumentary.
Oh, it's a mockumentary. It sounded like a slasher almost. That sounds cool.
It is a mockumentary. Yes.
Whoa.
It is a mockumentary murder. Yeah, it's so good.
Sounds cool. Thank you for sharing this. Was it Ivy who was speaking?
No, I was gonna say, I think all of the characters in Bruges, I find them, and I think a lot of them aren't nice people, but they have their own sort of code of ethics that they follow. So it's like we can sort of relate to them, even though they're like really like offensive, and they're most of them are criminals, like murderers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're very funny characters, and I think
that's my favorite movie actually. So I've seen it 10,000 times, and something that really works well about those characters in that story also is that even when they cross the line, we're still rooting for them, because usually a character crossing the line is an extension of who they sort of immutably are, at least at that point. Like Ken, for instance, he makes lots of jokes that would be cancelable in 2024, right, and things like this. But we're like, oh, he's just a kid, sort of. I know he's like 30 in the movie, but we're like, he kind of acts like a kid. He has that sort of juvenile nature to him where, he all throughout the movie, he's like, I'd rather just pout and kick my feet in the church rather than go up and look at the artifacts. Or he just kind of acts in this immature way that we're sort of like, that's just Ken being Ken. So I think that's a brilliant aspect of it. And Harry Waters, for instance, who is also a very scary character, like, sometimes how funny he is an extension of his scariness. Like, he's so scary that he would like have a bad phone call, then smash every piece of the phone afterwards. That kind of the fact that all the comedy seems to stem very naturally from who the characters are. It doesn't feel forced. It feels just really organic.
But I think it comes back to making your characters likable, and there's so many different ways to make you root for a character, and I think you have to identify that. And something that I've noticed recently, if you have your character betrayed, if you have the main character betrayed, we instantly dislike the person who betrayed them and like the main character more, because there's something that I feel like we have this like reaction to betrayal as, I don't know. And that I think that if you're going to have a horrible character in a story, if you make them likable, then we're more likely to root for them, and if we're more likely to root for them, we're more likely to find them funny.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're right, there's lots of ways to do that. Making the character pathetic is actually a way that can really make us like them more if you play it just right. And In Bruges has several betrayals that are that definitely do make us like Ken more. Like, let's think of, for instance, the playground scene, where Ray comes up to shoot Ken in the back of the head while he's sitting on the playground, and then Ken is putting the gun to his own head. And Ray's like, wait, what? You can't do that. And so we sort of actually, although that betrayal happens and we see the hurt that comes from it, we sort of come to relate to the betrayer afterwards too. And so he sort of like apologizes and is like, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. And we watch him sort of develop that empathy or he already had it, but he sort of remembers why he had that empathy for the person he was betraying. I could do a whole class on In Bruges. I definitely should. So if you're doing a straight man character, I'd be careful with this. I mean, you can absolutely use it. There's some great uses for straight men, but it helps if the situations they find themselves in do more of the heavy lifting for the humor, or you have to kind of flesh out the rest of the cast with really funny people. Think somebody like Michael from Arrested Development. For the early seasons, at least. I know he gets kind of weird later on, but like in the early seasons, Michael's the straight, sane, normal guy, more or less. Compared to everyone else, he sort of acts as that audience insert character that's like, oh, I wouldn't be one of the crazy family members. I'd be the only sane one. And kind of, you're like the eye of the storm of all of their crazy antics all around you. So often these are worlds where sort of everyone is crazy but me, and your protagonist goes to ridiculous lengths to try to hold things together or get things back to that sense of normalcy. That can be a nice way to play the straight man. Unlikable protagonists with morally iffy goals. Dark comedy characters are some of the most selfish and horrible people ever, and a big part of the appeal here is actually watching people attempt to do terrible things that we would never do, but in pursuit of things that we can relate to wanting. And just look at a lot of dark comedy TV shows like Always Sunny in Philadelphia. If we make them the butt of the joke, then ultimately it doesn't really matter what they're trying to get or how they're trying to get it. We like them because they're funny and because they go too far, and we're allowed to laugh at them because they sort of deserve whatever they get. They're trying something that is on its face ridiculous. Well, think of the Always Sunny sequence. Hey, I'm going to write a musical. How does that opening go? It's like the Charlie announces he's written a musical, and the rest of the cast are like, against who or versus who? And he's like, not against anybody. I just wrote a musical. And they're like, yeah, but to take who down? And that kind of just emphasizes the normal nature of their schemes, right? They're never just doing something. They're always doing something in order to achieve some over-the-top crazy goal, which may or may not actually be a realistic path towards that thing at all. But they seem to be convinced that it is. So an average episode will be like, we want to get a good review in the newspaper, so we're going to do crazy publicity stunts for our bar, but they all have different interpretations of what people would like or what people like about their bar in the first place. So one of them ends up just, I don't know, Mac starts a gym in the bar, and he's like, people love workouts, people love karate. We have Dennis, who's like, no, we got to do like a pickup artist event in the bar. That's what people want to see. And Charlie just like starts a fire in a public park. And he's like, people like big ideas. And they're like, Charlie, that fire's not, nobody's going to connect a fire in a park to our bar. And he's like, oh, that's a good point. Because he's like the wild card, right? So I think it doesn't matter what tactic or track they're taking towards getting that thing, even if it's crazy, stupid, dangerous, illegal, scary, or anything else. As long as we kind of get where they're coming from and why they want that thing so badly, and you just portray your characters as really wanting that thing. Characters that don't want stuff that badly are not going to make great protagonists in features. So with no context, certain scenes, and I'm not going to play the clip actually, but maybe I'll actually reference a different movie than this one. This is Fun with Dick and Jane, which I think is a very underrated dark comedy from 2005 with Jim Carrey. And this is a sequence where, so essentially the plot is there is a businessman who loses his job in the recession. It's essentially about economic anxiety. So he loses his job in the recession, and as a result, to maintain his and his wife's suburban lifestyle, they turn to crime. And it's sort of almost a wish fulfillment type story about what if we just did a crime spree to get everything we want, and we sort of steal the American dream that has been taken from us. It's kind of a brilliant idea. The way that this sequence plays out, which is just them going on their crime spree and doing a bunch of weird robberies, basically, it might seem like a couple psychopaths if you edited it together a little differently. But if we consider that, for instance, this is halfway through the movie, the whole long first act has been doing nothing but setting up how badly they need this, both financially and emotionally. We've been fully brought on board for their desperation, so therefore, in context, it's weirdly like a triumphant scene instead of a psychotic and scary one. That, in conjunction with the fact that they never really kill anybody, they're never really traumatizing. I guess they are traumatizing people. They're robbing stores with guns. But they're robbing stores and they're like, can I get a muffin and iced coffee? All right, thanks. And then they take it and they just go, right? They're just like using robbery to solve almost their daily whims, you know? So that's kind of the joke of it. They're not doing huge heists. They're not killing people. We're on board for what they want because we understand why they want it, and they don't cross the ultimate lines. So watching people do terrible things that we'd never do in pursuit of things that we can relate to wanting is a huge part of the appeal here, and just a big part of why storytelling is fun in general.
That was super cool, Connor. That made things click for me. I have a quick question. The hero, I think sometimes it's like the dude with the problem, type, or the hero what is it? Not the unlikely hero.
Snyder.
But the resistant, one that's resistant. Like say the slacker who suddenly has to save the world, and they're very, very resistant at first.
Yeah, that archetype is called the Fool Triumphant. Fool
Triumphant. So how do you obviously I know that they can be protagonists, but they don't necessarily want something enough. So is it more like that they fear the consequences more than they want something? Can a fear of, like with my character, she needs to break the curse. She wants to get straight A's and, get out of this town. But now she has to actually stay in the town and face her family. And she doesn't want to, but she's more afraid of the curse, that's making her do it. So it's like out of a fear. I guess that's the same thing as a want, right? Like wanting to avoid a fear is still a want.
Yeah, usually those sort of desires boil down to, I want things to get back to normal. Or like,
okay.
I like my life, and I want my life to stay the same. They don't have an active goal until the catalyst. That's when something jeopardizes or threatens that normal life. And therefore they have to take action to sort of attempt to get back to how things were. Usually they don't get back to how things were. And
No.
in solving the problem, they sort of reach some new other normal, maybe that they could never have imagined.
Better normal.
Yeah, if it's a happy ending, it could easily be they discover some better normal. Like let's just think like we're doing a story where a married man loves his life, loves his family, and one day all of his stuff gets repossessed by the bank and says, there is an error where we thought that your loan checked out, but it turns out it didn't check out. You don't own any of this. We take away everything from you. Most of that movie might be about him trying to make money in some other way, or trying to get his stuff back, or trying to fix that problem with the paperwork or whatever. But by the end, maybe he's realized, I didn't need that stuff. Like, I can be happy without that.
Right. Okay, yeah, so that is still that's a passionate want of, like, wanting to stay the same. So anyways, I just thought it's an interesting nuance, but it's still the same concept.
Yeah, definitely. And usually that break into three is where we will kind of find that confluence or that juxtaposition between what they initially wanted and what they've realized they need. Okay, other questions on, or comments, thoughts on unlikable protagonists with morally iffy goals?
Actually, just to tie that back to the fool triumphant is probably less likely to be an unlikable protagonist, potentially. Like, I mean, I guess unless if he gets sent to jail, he could want things to go back to the same where he's not in jail. But like, basically, the unlikable protagonists are usually going to be trying to scheme or do something, versus resisting something. But
there's a fool that we really root for. There's a fool that we want to be on his side, and there's a fool that we laugh at. There's sort of different versions of that. Someone like Michael Scott is kind of like the fool that we laugh at directly because he gets in his own way, messes things up. And then there's sort of like the everyman fool, like the sort of Seth Rogen kind of character that's like, he's just your average guy, and he ends up being thrust into a situation where he has to act decisively in order to get what he wants or to return to his normal. So a great way to get your protagonist, or to get the audience on board for an unlikable protagonist with a morally iffy goal. We were talking about anti-heroes in another class recently, and this advice kind of carries over and applies. You make the good guys worse. So this is just a clip from the script for Idle Hands. I don't think this is even in the movie, but I just love this dark comedy horror, where the main character is a teenage stoner whose hand gets possessed by a demon that starts killing people. Sometimes it's initially while he's asleep, so it seems like there's a serial killer going around that it turns out is him. And then it starts acting while he's awake, and so he has to like grab it and stop it from grabbing knives and stabbing people and stuff like that. It's ridiculous, right? How do we stay on board for a main character that's killing people? One, he doesn't want to be. He's trying to stop himself from doing it. And two, the good guys in this world, the cops, for instance, are comedically horrible. Here's a sequence where the cops are arresting a guy, and he's just like, hey, I'll give you guys $50 if you let me go. And they just look at each other for a second, they're like, each? And they just uncuff him and send him on his way. It's a nice way of showing, oh no, the cops are this is the first time we see them too. They're so hilariously incompetent and corrupt that of course we would root against them. Like we can root for anybody if you portray whoever they're up against as way worse than them. So in terms of drama, let me squish that down. In terms of drama or dramatic scenes, establishing a consistent jokey tone through an entire movie is a tricky commitment. Certain movies do it, like something like Kung Pao would do a consistent goofy tone all throughout, or a Mel Brooks movie. Often, they don't really have drama scenes. there are some serious ideas in the movies, but they don't really have dramatic sequences. You can make this work, though. You can allow your movie to have somber scenes, too, that let you play different notes more easily. Wes Anderson movies almost always have a couple just really serious, sad scenes. If you set up a tone that allows for this, I would say don't be afraid to play those different notes. Even if the tone is consistently jokey, it can sometimes underscore and amplify everything else to include some moments that are downbeats as well. Often in dark comedies, serious scenes are interwoven with humor to some extent. Martin McDonagh is a master of this sort of like both at once approach, where it's like every scene is comedic and serious. Sometimes we're like you're crying, laughing, and disgusted all at once. But you might ask, when do we let comedy fall away entirely? Like, think of the monologue towards the end of the Fleabag pilot, where she's in the taxi and she tells the taxi driver why she's depressed. Or the sequence in Royal Tenenbaums, where, is his name Richie Tenenbaum? Attempts suicide with a razor. It's after he gets rejected by the love of his life. It's like, there's no jokes in that scene at all. So you don't have to have jokes in every scene. Although no one's laughing no one's having a bad time when they're laughing, that doesn't mean we only have a good time when we're laughing throughout. Let's look at a couple more slides on comedy logic. Then I probably don't want to talk too much about rewrites. Yeah, we'll briefly touch on. Let's do logic, satire, and then I want to save time for Open Lab and Logline's sharing or pitching dark comedy ideas that you'll be working on for your presentation next week. So let's wrap up with the slideshow with our last few slides. So to begin with, logic. So the limit of suspension of disbelief for a given element is directly proportional to its funniness, is kind of like the scientific law of rule of funny. The idea is that it can violate real-world principles, or like anything in your story can violate real-world principles, for instance, giving a temporary ability to a character for the sole purpose of one gag. But the character can't do that when it's not funny. Think, for instance, Wile E. Coyote walks on thin air because he doesn't notice that he's at the edge of a cliff, and he falls when he notices it. So we sort of understand that moment, and it's the fact that he doesn't notice the edge that is sort of, quote, keeping him suspended. Thus, this jives with the overall joke of the world, which is basically that the entire world or reality is like mocking Coyote's constant ugly failure. But he couldn't, it's not like we're building a world-building element, we're establishing a magic system where later he could walk on thin air again as a calculated part of a scheme. It just wouldn't work consistently like that. That's not the rule of funny. The limit of the suspension of disbelief... Oh, I just defined this, yes. So certain comedy works, they function differently, and it's essential that you're just kind of consistent, or at least consistently inconsistent, like the Sarah Silverman program, which on an episode-by-episode basis kind of changes the rules of its reality. Like in one episode, there's like they have a robot roommate that they I guess have always had, or in one episode Sarah starts dating God, or in one episode there's a ghost that possesses one of them, or just like, and then it never gets brought up again. Things like that are kind of, it's just the zany cartoon world that they live in is always inconsistent like that. But we can't really use the strange logic of the world to solve problems for the characters. And we can't really render the world completely nonsensical to the extent that no one can tell what's going on or what the rules are anymore. And we can't get the character unfairly out of trouble without earning it. Those are the kind of constraints on the rule of funny. In comedy logic, rule of funny applies to supernatural elements too. And I mentioned idle hands a minute ago. After killing his friends with his possessed hand, Anton's friends, Seth Green and his other friend, they come back to life as zombies. There's not that much explanation for why this happens in the movie, beyond the fact that clearly we're in some sort of supernatural world where paranormal stuff just happens, I guess, all the time. Well, it fits into the... So I guess I would say it fits into that sort of Sam Raimi-ish horror world of the movie. Second of all, their explanation kind of jives with that ultimate disaffected 90s teen sort of what's the point ethos. He's like, why did you guys come back to life? And they're thinking about it. They're like, yeah, we don't really know. I guess it's, we were dead. We were walking towards the light. And it was like, there's so many steps. And it was just so far away. Like, just didn't seem worth it sort of thing. It's like, so the idea that they are lazy stoners is why they're alive again. They didn't feel like going to the afterlife, basically. And that kind of just fits with the sensibility of that story. I hope that makes sense. The simplicity and the stupidity of that becomes the joke. And because it's not used to solve some big problem for the hero, it's actually used to create more problems for him, we accept it and we understand it, and it works. It's less than halfway, which is nice. Like, we don't want to be adding new rules after halfway. This is like minute 38. It's actually an incredible development in premise scenes. His friends whom he murders come back to life, and we're like, why is this happening? And they're just like, we don't know, basically.
So would you say if you were to create new rules, it's better to do it to hinder the character than help them?
Yeah,
the main character?
Absolutely, 100,000%. That I would write that on a post-it note. If you're going to add new rules, do it to hinder or impede your characters, not to help them, or not as a cheat. So you could consider making the characters themselves maybe even realize the absurdity of a situation. That can sometimes highlight or lampshade an absurd plot element, but just be careful not to break the reality of the movie with too much of this. To me, I think some of the Deadpool stuff does lean too heavily on lampshading and stuff like this, to the extent where it's like, okay, if you're referencing something, if you're like, it's like a bad Marvel movie or whatever, it's like, do you need to say that? Do we need to constantly be pointing out every choice that we're making and making fun of everything that we're doing? No, I would say not. Like, take your story seriously sometimes. It's our job to laugh at it and, drink beer and goof on it with our friends. It's not your job. So when properly set up, you can turn unlikely or illogical plot elements into jokes or an intrinsic part of your world, but it just, first of all, has to be funny and has to fit within that world and its rules and its ethos. Okay, let's just, actually, do we even want to get into controversy? Is this too big a can of worms? Yeah, let's cut the slides at this point, and we'll go into loglines and pitches. I'd rather spend the time with you guys hearing your awesome dark comedy ideas and getting ready for your pitch next week. So just to begin with, if you don't know, logline is that one sentence that describes the main character in a way that suggests that they have the toughest, longest, or most ironic journey. Basically, it's one sentence that says, when or after inciting incident, an adjective protagonist must conflict before or in order to, stakes, or ticking clock. Those are the questions we want to know the answers to. What starts the story off? Who is it about? In terms of more than just one single word, give us an adjective and a noun so we understand why it's the right person for the story. They must conflict, meaning this is what we're watching them do in the middle of the movie, basically, before or in order to stakes or ticking clock. That's what's the bad thing that will happen if they don't act or if they fail. And then the ticking clock might suggest how much time they have to do it. You have only 2 hours to clean up the house before mom and dad get home. Okay. So, logline, one sentence. Try to avoid names. We don't need to know your character names. We're not going to remember them. And avoid phrases that suggest internal goals. Comes to terms is the worst phrase for a logline. It is the only thing I outright would say, rewrite your logline right away. If that is in it, it is banned. No coming to terms. Begins to, must decide, or decides to are also just not necessarily banned, but they're like a bad sign because they're kind of saying, you don't need to tell us about this. You don't need to give us the inciting incident for an inciting incident. You don't need to tell us that your character starts to do something. We want to know the path that they actually are going on. We don't want to know that the whole movie is about them deciding and thinking about a choice that they eventually will make. It's about them living through and struggling through situations that make them kind of live that choice. Crafting loglines requires practice and a lot of familiarity with dramatic structure and a lot of work, so don't expect to get this right away, and it doesn't have to be perfect. We can start to shape it over time, and it sometimes takes many attempts to get it just right. We're writing this for marketing purposes, meaning it's persuading people to read your scripts, making it easier for people to discuss your script and also assess what your goals were, so it makes feedback easier. And also it's for you as that sort of North Star to help you guide the writing process of your whole story. It's going to be like a compass for you to follow. Every scene is going to exploit your premise. It's going to give you a head start on outlining and just keep you on track. Okay, that's why loglines matter. This is what loglines look like. You don't, if I would say it's okay if you don't have a full logline. If you just want to talk about your idea within 5 to 10 minutes, then that's totally fine too. Let's ask who would like to share a pitch, idea, or logline for their movie.
I've got loglines. Give me just a second.
Okay. And we will go in the order that they're shared, and you do have to be able to speak out loud and answer questions. We got one from Charlie. Thank you for that.
I'm gonna go now. Because I can take the dog out, and I will be in these classes, Connor. I just won't be actively writing because, I've got too much with the novel and the TV show. So
all good. All right. Thanks, Becky.
I'll see you later.
See you next time. All right, I see a logline from Charlie. I see one from Luke. Anybody else?
I have one. I'll write it in. I'll need to work. I need to workshop it. It's an old, fun idea.
Okay. We have half an hour, so we'll get through as many as we can. Charlie, do you want to start?
Okay. Just want me to read it?
Do you have do you have title, genre, or comps?
I have like a working title. So the working title is emotional intelligence. The genre will be a dark comedy action. I'm playing around. I guess it could be a feature film. Like I could sum it up, or I see it also in episodes. But for the sake of argument, we'll say feature film is the format. And my comps currently are Spy from 2015 meets Killing Eve, the series.
What was the first one?
Spy.
Spy. Okay, I like that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so two sort of espionage-based comedies. All right, you can go ahead and read the logline.
All right. After returning from deep cover, a disaffected and out-of-shape agent struggles to respect the social contract while reintegrating into civilian life, in time to pass her evaluations to prove she's ready for her next field assignment before losing her only true identity.
Okay, thanks for that. So to begin with, I think this is a run-on sentence, that it's kind of...
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of abstract phrasing in here that makes it tough to tell what this movie's about.
Okay.
I love the idea of returning from deep cover, a disaffected and out-of-shape agent. The first half, you totally had me. Struggles to respect the social contract is such a tough to envision goal for a movie. What does that mean?
So I have like premise scene ideas in our head. It's like, imagine if like James Bond, or right, like the secret agent, which we all think is super cool, actually interacted with the public. They'd be like terrible people, and they would use like their skill craft to do terrible things to people, like when they're upset. So some of the premise scene ideas I've had in my head is like at the grocery store, right? If like someone steals like the last bag of carrots or something like that, she would just do like terrible things, like either shred their cart up or like take the wheel off their cart and like, like create havoc for people to get her way.
Okay, it's kind of like those serial killer kind of stories we were talking about before.
Exactly, right. And then it kind of just like escalates from there.
Escalates from there, meaning what? What's the central conflict?
That they're just not well socialized. Like they've been in the world of like spies and shooting and killing, where like all of that stuff is expected and accepted, and like that's not acceptable for most of us. You can't go around just shooting people or like doing terrible things to people in order to accomplish whatever mission you set out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like get the carrots, or the last pack of beer, or waiting at a washateria for the laundry to get done and someone takes your stuff out of the washing machine before a dryer is available. Just like little things that send this character over the edge.
Okay. So it seems like it's the central event, or the thing that you're working up to, is this evaluation. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a physical and a psych eval that she has to pass.
Okay. And if that's at the end of the movie, though, then you might ask, what are the benchmarks along the way? And it's just hard to... It just sounds like a show. It sounds very episodic. It's struggling to...
I've had both in mind. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think maybe something that will help you is a central relationship. Almost always, if it's lacking direction or sense of focus, then the central relationship will help you. So she must team up with this person who is like, I don't know, a reintegrator or something like that, who is trying to... Or a therapist, or a friend, or a spouse, or a rom... Often there's a lot of rom-com type spy stuff.
Yeah, she meets somebody in the first act, and they hook up in the second act.
Oh, great. Okay, so maybe is that kind of the central hook of this? It's more like a rom-com where that becomes the point, or that becomes the kind of benchmark by which we determine, am I ready to integrate back into society or not, or something like that.
I think it helps her, yeah, but I don't know if it's like central, because she's got essentially the idea that I had is she comes back, right, and she's supposed to reintegrate while she's passing these exams, but like her friends have moved on with their life, so they're not around anymore. There's new neighbors in the apartment where she lives. Like she doesn't have any real social connections, And so she's kind of like struggling, but she doesn't have that network of people in your life that you would have to help you. And so she kind of lashes out initially, but then she meets this guy and he's like really nice and she's kind of suspicious about it, but he's a regular guy. So I could play it for laughs, but there is like a romantic component in there. And he does kind of like help her find emotional intelligence and connection with people again, like while she's struggling to lose weight, he'll help her with that, right? And like her point of view and seeing things, he's like, well, maybe people, aren't out to get you, and like, and not everyone's lying, like people can just be stupid and not know what's going on, that kind of thing.
Why is she disaffected and out of shape if she likes what she does and she's a competent agent and just got back from the field?
So I have like this idea where she's almost like in character, right? And maybe like the guy that's with her, over time when she's doing this long-term assignment, she gains weight as part of this persona. Like they go out and eat these lavish meals and so she's under deep cover. So you can't be like, oh, I know you like bigger girls, but like I need to stay a size 2 kind of thing, right? Like, so she goes along with it. But then when she's back, like you got to cut weight again and get back into shape if you expect to get into the field. So she has to tackle all of this while, being around regular people.
Right. And you mentioned this is action, but it doesn't sound like action unless you have some sort of consistent threat or something like this. I almost imagine the action version of this would be something more like, I start dating the perfect guy and I'm going to reintegrate back into society. But then enemy agents from my past, or maybe my own agencies coming after me, and I need to sort of try to not let him find out that I'm a spy by, we're on the date and I beat up the ninjas while I'm out at the bathroom or whatever, right? So that would maybe be an action-focused version of it. This doesn't quite feel like action. This feels more like a dramedy.
Okay. I was thinking, when I was thinking of it in an episodic fashion, I do have a series logline and then a pilot logline. But when I was thinking it that way at first, what would happen later is that since she can't get out in the field, right? Like she's kind of itching, so she starts doing like moonlighting work for the mob, right? And maybe she starts off as like a wheelman, and then she like works her way up into doing wet work kind of thing. And so she's doing that while working for the intelligence agency. Like it's kind of a conflict of interest, and she ends up killing one of the other operatives at her agency that was working like for one of her mentors. And so, she finds herself like knee deep in shit from her impulsive nature and wanting to get back in the field before she's ready. But that is not included in the logline. So I get what you're saying.
Okay, yeah, so that sounds like a separate movie probably, but if it's a show, that could easily be just like a later development of the series. So overall, this does sound more like a show to me, just because it doesn't seem... You're describing it more as like a series of interesting types of situations, rather than having that one sort of like overall situation that we are working up to. I know that evaluation is does provide us a finish line, but I think Essential Relationship would help you focus this and make it feel more like a movie and less like, here's an idea for stories.
Okay. So maybe it's geared more towards television.
I think so.
Okay.
A thought that I had is it could maybe be a murder mystery where people are also being killed off in the office, and maybe the reason why they haven't gone for it is because no one recognizes her anymore because she's put so much weight on. It's like,
that's part of one of the central relationships she has at work. They kind of like talk about how shitty she is as a person, and it's because they don't recognize her because she's put on so much weight. And so she has to like reestablish these connections. People are like, oh, I'm not a bitch. Like, try to convince people to want to be around her when they don't have a positive association with her in the past. I do have a scene like that in there, and she's like smoking and stuff like that, which connects her with somebody in the office that she doesn't like, as a way to try to suppress her appetite and cut weight quickly. Like she's doing all the wrong things.
Okay, well, any questions about this one before we wrap up for now?
No, it's better as a TV show, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it going either way. If you wanted to go the movie direction, central relationship and stronger sense of focus around like a singular event will probably help more.
Okay. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Luke, you want to go next?
Sure.
All right. We have
this is an old one.
Number one thing.
not quite structured correctly, the logline, but it's funny, so I haven't edited it yet.
Okay.
A gullible student is blackmailed by his detachable penis when he discovers evidence that might be killing his neighbors.
Okay. It's Idle Hands meets. There's a musical by the group called Star Kid called Me and My Dick, which is kind of weirdly about. It's not about serial killers, but it's a world where everyone's parts can detach and talk and stuff like that. Okay, so a gullible student is blackmailed by his detachable penis when he discovers evidence it might be killing his neighbors. So I think you have the cause and effect reverse, or you have the effect and then the cause.
Exactly.
So I would start with when he discovers that I guess his own penis is responsible for a string of serial murders. A gullible student must do what? He must break free of the sort of contract or servitude of this thing. Like, what does it actually want, would be my question.
Yeah, it's like Idle Hands or Basket Case or whatever. It's just this. It just wants to kill, and he has to sort of stop it.
It just wants to kill. That's interesting. Is it killing when it's like horny or something, or what's the and what criteria does it kill people?
Probably something like that. I haven't thought too much about this in over a year, probably.
Okay. Because I would say something like Basket Case or like My Pet Monster Stories. It makes sense. It's a creature that wants to eat food. And the Idle Hands is a hand. Like, obviously it belongs to the devil. The devil wants to do bad things. The best way of doing that is with a hand to stab people and stuff. So I would maybe ask, what specifically does the choice of part actually bring to the story? What does it want from him? Because that's going to affect kind of what he has to do to get out of that situation. Like, does it want him to have lots of romantic encounters or partners or something like that?
I think he's like a sexually repressed, like, virgin.
Okay.
Or an incel or something like that. He's
That's good. I would include that in the logline for sure if that's relevant.
Could the penis almost be like a were penis? So we have like a scene where it transforms into this monster and goes and kills the neighbors.
I think it's funnier if it's just a penis, like a little
Either like
murder
a puppet
penis
or an animatronic or something.
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
Okay.
Like, it doesn't even make sense how it actually does the killings, but it does.
Wow, it's got a little gun or something.
Like, how does it pick up a knife? You know, like.
We don't have to get too into the details.
Over and over and over.
This is a public class, so we probably can't get way too into the details. But
Sure.
I will say, I like the idea. I would just want to know what its actual specific intention is. And that would it would help also if you said, so if your main character is like a sort of socially isolated, I would understand it as like an extension of his like libido gone mad or something like that, right? In which case, maybe, is it trying to get him to just sort of have as much sex as possible? Or is there a specific partner it wants him to have or something like that?
Just trying to get him to have sex at all. It's tired of, yeah.
So maybe is it killing people that it views as impediments to that? Or is it killing people that turn him down or something like that?
I think it's just doing it as blackmail. It's doing it to sort of like vent sexual frustration or something, perhaps, and B, the big thing is the blackmail.
Oh, so it's like, just go to that party, man, or I swear to God, I'm gonna kill someone tonight. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll kill another one. That sweet old lady on the rocking chair next door. I've been looking at her. You know, like, you better go to this party.
That's actually pretty
exactly
funny. I like that relationship, but if that's the case, then I think you'll just want to clarify what you mean exactly by the blackmail. It becomes almost like a dark mentor figure, if that's the case, where it's trying to get him to improve his life and like find the things that he wants. But if he doesn't, then there's gory, disastrous consequences.
Well, he doesn't want those things there. He's like a sexually repressed weirdo. He's one of those, like, you know, virginity is cool, bro. Like, he's one of those guys.
Oh, but if you start him off there, it's going to seem like he's in denial. So is it that he's asexual, and that's what you're getting at? Or is it that he simply, like... It sort of seems like the story would be about how he secretly does want those things on some level. Is that not how you saw it?
It's not exactly how I saw it. I saw it. I think it's trying to sort of like corrupt him, and not literally, but in the story, it's like he wants to be this like virginity is cool, bro, type of person, and
But is that because he suppressed
penis
his
has other
natural
plans.
urges in some way?
Probably.
So I think most audiences would see that as a negative thing overall. And so the character is sort of struggling again. I mean, if this has a happy ending, it's going to end with him in a happy relationship, I would think. But if it's a sad ending, or I'm not sure where on earth this would go. It's already such a crazy premise in the first place. Anyway, so I would just clarify the nature of the relationship or arrangement there between the protagonist and antagonist. So therefore, we understand this, like the nuance and the specific fun of the story.
We could start him off on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's just like
Okay. Yeah, that's probably better.
completely horny all the time, and he can't even control it. And
Sure.
and then he has to sort of like, I don't know. There's a ton of different ways you could do it.
Yeah, there's an easy metaphor in that one. That one is sort of about how like he's really repressed. He really wants, love and sex and these things like this, but he doesn't know how to get them. So maybe he's in these incel red pill communities or something like that. And then the arc becomes about him sort of learning the right way to handle those urges and the right way to make those relationships.
Yeah, I think that's the direction I would go.
Seems right to me. Thanks for sharing this. Any questions on this one?
Not really. I guess we can workshop the logline later. I'm going to flip it around, but I don't think I have any questions now.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Funny idea. Okay, Amanda, were you next?
Yeah. So this was one of my only ideas for a movie, and it had the vibe of sort of Cable Guy meets Sleeping with the Enemy. So the logline is not phrased in the right way, it needs work. But when the catalyst, I think, is her getting into a relationship, and then the act one, the crossing the threshold, I think they move into each other, but she basically wants out from the get-go. But act two is her trying to get out of the relationship. So when an introverted woman gets into a relationship, she's unable to leave out of fear of hurting his feelings. She goes to ridiculous lengths to get him to break up with her so she doesn't have to end it. That's not the right way to phrase it, but so basically she's trying to get this guy to break up with her so she doesn't have to hurt his feelings.
Right.
But it's not just hurting his feelings. Like there's something eerie about him. Like there's a deeper fear of like retaliation. So yeah, it could be as light as she doesn't want to hurt his feelings. Actually that would be funnier. That would be less dark. So if she was just trying to get out of the relationship to not hurt his feelings, and like everything she does makes him like her more. So like she starts smoking and he's like, so that he'll break up with her, but he doesn't. And then she gains 20 pounds and that doesn't do anything. And I haven't thought of all the things, but basically she kind of goes to these more and more extremes to get him to break up with her.
I haven't seen this movie, but is this the plot of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days?
Is it?
Somebody confirm that. I believe that's about a woman who deliberately, I believe it's one of those things, it's like, I'm a writer for a magazine. And for this article that I'm writing, I'm going to get into a relationship and then sort of make him break up with me within 10 days. And then, of course, through the process of that, he falls more in love with her, and she's like, I shouldn't have done that, I need to get him back, sort of thing like that. I think it's like that sort of plot line. Somebody should confirm that, though, because I don't normally watch rom-coms.
I actually saw that one, and I don't remember that being... Let's see.
So,
it is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's a game. Yes, but she's making it a game, like she's trying to get him to break up with her in 10 days. Yeah, I guess that is interesting.
So it's a similar hook, but what I would suggest then in that case is to differentiate it. So maybe go the darker route. Like maybe this is about, I think this guy might be crazy. He might kill me if I break up with him. So therefore I need to get away out of, and in that case, the fact that she's introverted is maybe less relevant than something else, right? Because like if he was dangerous, then it wouldn't. Then the key trait being tested, like her introversion, has nothing to do with it. It's not even being tested right now. In that case, you'd have to find some other kind of angle for the story. But I think that might be the way to go. I mean, it's pretty dark, pretty bleak. But then again, maybe she's wrong about him.
But the other thing, because I mean, well, the How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is like a game for her to provoke him to dump her, whereas this is she's in a relationship and she genuinely wants out of it.
Right.
And she doesn't know how to break it. So it is a much different angle, even if it is still comedy. But but like the catalyst, I guess, is her getting. So what happens is she's about to break up with him, and she gets appendicitis, and so he takes her to the hospital, and then he's basically helping her recover, and she feels really guilty about breaking up with him, and then somehow he ropes her into moving in with her, and I mean, Act 1 would be, Act 2, the different world would be them living together and her trying to end it, essentially.
Wait, sorry, who moved in with whom?
The guy, they move in together. The guy moves in with her.
He moves into her house. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it can work. I think you'll just have to find that balance of like, does she believe her life is in danger? Because like you'll have to, the stakes have to be at a certain level, or else the conflict just doesn't make that much sense. If there's not a significant danger, then why can't she just break up with him? So yeah, that might be just the first question, and then second question would be: is there actually like a cause for concern? Maybe the catalyst thing that makes her think maybe this guy's dangerous or something was like a misunderstanding, or like it was him prepping for a surprise party, so she thought he was out having an affair or whatever it is. And it turns out he was really just prepping this amazing vacation for her or something like that. Like, you could always have that development down the line where she realizes, I totally misread the signs or something like that. You could go that way. Or you could go the horror-ish route where it's like, no, he's actually a crazy stalking serial killer.
Right. That was my original thing, was that she just has a feeling that she just doesn't want to, she doesn't know how to end it. She just doesn't know how to hurt his feelings, and she's afraid of the fallout of that.
You can do that. It's just that's just your main character essentially causing the problem for themselves. That they then it can work in certain tones and in certain stories, but it annoys a lot of audience members if it's just like the only reason there's a problem here is because you're delusional or that you are emotionally immature. Like, that sounds like a teenage kind of relationship where it's like, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings, so I'll just like suggest that I want to break up or whatever. Like,
but doing really ridiculous. Yeah, I guess it would. I think so. The original goal was, or the original idea was that it was dark, like Cable Guy dark. Like, okay, I need this to end, and I don't know how to do it because this person's really weird, and I'm not, like, they're weird enough that I don't know what the fallout will be. And they seem very bold. So Cable Guy's like one of the ones that resonates the most with me, because he's so like wants to be the friend and
yeah. Or you know what would be kind of fun? It's just a direction I would love to see it go. You can take it whatever way you want.
No, I'm open.
Something like halfway through, or so like his behavior just gets really erratic and bizarre. Let's say that he gets like, she comes home and she sees him punching a wall one time and he doesn't even acknowledge it. It gets like, she's like, is he going nuts? And then she tries all these crazy ways to get him to break up with her. Then about halfway through, she realizes the carbon monoxide detector is broken or something like that. And then she finds all these like pictures and videos he's taken, and he's like, I think my girlfriend's crazy. And she sees like he's taking clips of her doing crazy stuff too. And they realize, oh my God, we've just been inhaling like CO2 this whole time. Or something like that would be a funny way to take it too. I don't know.
But that would be the midpoint, but then where would it go from there?
Well, the midpoint, I guess from there would be, oh my God, I shouldn't have done all those schemes to make him, now I have to explain the situation to him, but he thinks I'm the crazy one, and he's trying to escape from me now.
And then then he really does want to break up with her or something.
And so it goes from trying to get away from the relationship to trying to save the relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just trying to think of ways it could go besides just, I was right, he is crazy, he is dangerous, it's a Lifetime movie, he's stalking me and gonna kill me because he's an abusive ex kind of thing,
Right. I see, because they're the sleeping with the enemy kind of, Lifetime movie type thing. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just trying to find something. It would be cool if it felt like it went in a different direction. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted it to be like really funny though, like where the things like where the dark comedy comes in is the lengths she goes to try to get him to leave her. And I don't have a whole lot of ideas, but that part, I And then, have you seen Heartbreak Kid?
No.
That one's Ben Stiller. So basically, he marries a woman who winds up being really kind of crazy, and then he meets someone on vacation, and he's trying to break up with her, the girlfriend, and kind of does things to sort of try to make her break up with him, and then he falls in love with this other woman, but then in the end, he kind of does the same thing to her. So we see that he's actually kind of the crazy guy in the end. But yeah, it's sort of a little bit of a reverse. Anyways, yeah, I think, I'll have to think about it more. But this has given me some good ideas.
Great. Yeah, maybe we didn't land on a definitive adjustment here, but hopefully that just gets you thinking about like the specificity of the direction. And maybe like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is one of your comps, perhaps. It's just hard to avoid the comparison. If you're like, if the central hook is basically the characters trying to do the same idea, then you just have to amplify whatever sets it apart.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
right,
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for sharing this. We have time for one more. Vivian, are you ready to look at Blood Test? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Did I skip one? Did I skip? Arthur, are you here? Sorry, Vivian. Oh, never mind. Maybe Arthur's not here.
No, I'm here, but I'm still like rethinking the premise because it's a very old premise, and I've been doing the same thing over and over again. So yeah.
Okay, if you're still rethinking it, then I can give you some more time to work on it, and we'll look at Vivian's logline for now. Vivian, are you here and ready to look at yours?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let's take a look. And reminder to all members, there's labs twice a week, Friday 12 to 2 and Saturday 4 to 6, where you can come with whatever loglines, outlines, pages you're working on and get feedback on those. All right, go ahead and read this out for us.
A chronically online sadist teams up with a vampire to kill a group of recovering drug addicts.
Well, there's something lovely about the concision and simplicity of the sentence, so good on you for that. I don't get the story, though. A chronically online sadist teams up with a vamp. Why are they killing a group of drug addicts?
So, it's the whole story is very weird. I've come up with a lot of it. It's just like, it's hard to kind of fit into a logline. At least like a normally formatted one. So her life kind of sucks, but she's also like a chronically online person, so it's kind of like half her fault, you know. And the only real pleasure she gets is by watching like these snuff videos of like people dying and shit. So when she like meets this vampire and he's like, "Oh man, I want to suck blood so bad, but I shouldn't." She's like, "No, you should. You should do that. You should really do that." So it's kind of like a slasher film, but from the perspective of the slashers, and in this case it's kind of like she wants to live out, like, she wants to be able to experience the shit she's experienced online with like in person, you know what I mean? It's really weird.
Okay, but why these targets? Why a group of recovering drug addicts? Is there some sort of grudge that she has against them, or why them?
So she had entered herself into this little group. It's like one of those public groups of they have like these addiction recovery groups around here where you can just go in at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're like, you know, respectful and shit, like they'll let you speak and tell your story and stuff, and they'll try and help you. It's sort of a situation like that, but she was going there for the reason of like, I know that this is bad. I don't get why why that is though. You know what I mean? And she sees them kind of as like easy targets because.
Okay, so you're saying. Were all of them in the same addiction recovery support group? The vampire was there too, or just her and the addicts?
Not the vampire, but her and the other addicts were.
Well, that would be a nice connection, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be seems like a way to meet the vampire. But okay, So a bunch of members of her own support group. Okay, and why is she targeting them?
So she's the way I'm like looking at it is like they're kind of easy targets because she can lure them all somewhere by using the items of their addiction, whether that be like drugs or alcohol or whatever.
Oh, okay, so it's just a crime of opportunity. There's no actual motive or grudge or relationship there?
Yeah, no, it's like they're easy targets. They're already kind of like looked down upon by a lot of society and shit, so who's gonna care?
And the whole movie's about them trying to kill this one group of people?
It builds up to that event, you know.
It builds up to that. What's stopping a vampire from just killing what's difficult about this?
So it's kind of like he's sort of just a normal person, but he's like, as far as vampire abilities go, they're really strong.
Okay.
Like he can still be, you know, taken down, especially later in the film. As he drinks more blood, his body begins to decompose and he starts dying.
Wait, what? Why would a vampire start dying when he drank blood?
It's sort of like a reverse of like what a normal vampire curse is. So they have infinite life, but they also have like insatiable thirst for blood. So if they fall to that, it's kind of like an addiction allegory. If they fall to that, that's what kills them.
Oh. That is not how most vampire mythologies work. So to even call him a vampire is sort of on its face misleading, and it's almost like a disability more than anything else. But still, I'm not grasping what's difficult about killing these people.
You sort of got to get them all to like a certain location, and that's kind of what's going on here. Like they lure them all there, and then they kind of want to pick them off one by one, so that way she can do her thing. She's like, it's like I said, this is a really weird one because there's like scenes of masturbation and shit because that's what she gets out of this, really.
Okay.
While he's doing the killing. So
but if
like,
they need to pick them off, if they're trying to pick them off one by one, then why get them all together? Why not just murder them one by one on their own?
Oh, that makes sense.
It seems like your characters are creating problems for themselves to solve.
Yeah. I don't know. Unless I can figure out some reason. It makes more sense that they just pick them off one by one.
Yeah, or, I mean, are they important people in some way? Do they work for the government? Is one of them, like, connected to the mob? Or, I don't know. I'm just looking for what is the conflict? What are we watching your characters struggle with or struggle against? Also, it doesn't even really, like, the fact that you portray this as killing a group of recovering drug addicts is sort of like saying a mugger decides to target a businessman, but like the businessman was just the guy that happened to be walking by. He wasn't deliberately targeting that guy. There wasn't a story or reason why. It's not like fulfilling some sort of revenge or anything like that. So it's more like a chronically online sadist teams up with a vampire to kill people and sort of sate her sadistic urges, I would think, right? Something more like that. The victims themselves, like the identity of the victims is not really that relevant.
Right.
So, yeah, tricky one here. To begin with, the fact that your vampire works completely differently from how vampires normally work might indicate that you need to pick a different word. Second of all, if he does have vampire powers and skills, why is it tough to murder innocent, unsuspecting civilian victims? And then you might ask also, is there a finish line to this? Is this like... or is this like a show premise where this seems like something that could go on forever?
Yeah, so I guess there's a finish line by virtue of the fact that he's dying the more blood he drinks.
Why would he agree to help her then?
So it's sort of like he feels dejected from and misplaced from society and shit, or like, you know, people don't really care about him and she's the only one kind of acting like she does. So he doesn't want to lose that. And if it's like it's like, wow, she finally likes me for this thing that I've been hiding, you know? I don't know. It's
And therefore I
really
want to
weird.
die?
Huh?
And therefore he wants to die, or he wanted to die before?
No, it's just like, it's kind of like he wants to drink blood because that's kind of one of the things that comes with this version of like the vampire disease or whatever it is. But it's like he hasn't been because it's kind of like, you know, looked down upon, and he doesn't want to get like I don't know. It's
So
like
it kills him and it makes him lose his powers?
Hmm?
So drinking blood is the thing he's not supposed to do because it will make him die or lose his powers. Is that right?
both. Yeah.
Both. I can't even put together the basic motivations of the characters here. It seems like they're doing stuff that's working against their own interests. They're pursuing their goals in a way that it doesn't seem to make sense. I'm struggling with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an addiction allegory thing going on where it's like,
But shouldn't drinking blood make you a more powerful vampire then? And if you're going for the normal addiction allegory is the more you indulge in this, the more you want to consume more and more. It makes you into like a worse blank thing. If you eat people, it makes you into a worse werewolf. If you drink more blood, it turns you into a worse vampire, right? Usually, it's not like if you drink blood, you'll die.
yeah, I get what you're saying.
So I can see how it might make sense in a certain way, but maybe you just need to phrase it or explain it a little differently. It's nice that you've used so few words. That's great. But maybe vampire is the wrong idea here. Maybe it's I don't even know how you'd explain it. It's such a unique concept there.
I don't know either. Like the closest thing I could think of is vampires because they have that insatiable thirst for blood or whatever. I was like, I guess.
Does she even need a vampire to do it? I'm just like kind of lost. Would it be impossible for her to murder them on her own? I guess you're saying she doesn't want to do it herself?
Yeah.
Okay. She just wants to watch and like get off on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you've picked the wrong main character for this. I'm not sure. It just feels like your main character's goals don't really have a clear finish line to them. Don't feel that relatable for an audience. Not that you have to do that, not that we have to root for the character, but we're not rooting for whom are we rooting for here? Like anyone at all? It seems like maybe the victims themselves, in which case maybe this movie is like, I feel like somebody in my support group is trying to kill me. Maybe that's more what the story is. It's just kind of hard to wrap my head around the stakes of this one.
I get what you're saying.
So keep at it. I think there's funny stuff in here. Maybe it comes down to how you're explaining it, or maybe you could just move some story elements around in order to clarify and reach your goals more easily. I'm not 100% sure. It feels like you might just have to decide what your ambitions are.
I get that.
Okay, great. Any questions on this one?
No, I appreciate you.
No problem. Thanks so much for sharing. All right, we're wrapping up. We're past our time, so we'll leave you on the schedule for the upcoming boot camp once I move this out of the way. So next week we're doing logline to outline, and then from there we're going all the way through 8 weeks of feature writing. You will wrap this one up around February 2nd because we do have the holidays that are kind of in the middle of this. That will delay us by just a couple weeks there, but you can see the dates. First draft finished, and I guess you have a little extra time. Maybe it's more like February 2nd. Wait, that is the novel finishing date, I think. If the final lab is on the 26th, then you're finishing by, I think, December 2nd. There we go. Okay.
It's
Wait, that's right.
January 26th.
Oh, January
and February 2nd.
Wait,
Sorry,
how is the final lab on November 26th and they're finished by January?
No, it's January 26th.
Oh, this is January 26th. Okay.
Yeah.
And then
February 2nd.
February 2nd. Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Sundays 11 to 1 for the next 8 weeks. So we'll see you guys back here next week. You can come back and pitch whether it's something you worked on today or some brand new idea. We'll be glad to hear back from you at the next free and public class. And we'll see you guys soon at your next Script Camp event. Go ahead,
Please
Nacho.
vote in the poll. Yeah, confirm
Yeah, we've
if
got a
you're
poll in the chat.
maybe joining.
Let us know in that poll if you plan on joining us or if you have other questions, and we'd be glad to answer those for you. Thanks, guys.